Thank you everyone for joining us for day 2 of planning for organic certification webinar that's hosted with by the Cook County Farm Bureau. My name is Debbie, and I'm so glad that you are willing to share this next hour or so with us. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to share again a couple of little housekeeping etiquette rules. Number one is when we begin, if you can make sure that your microphones are muted, just so that we're not hearing your background noise or that. If for any reason you need to step away, if you want to go ahead and turn your video off, you can, but we'd love to have you be here. It's better for, I think, the presenters on the other end. And then lastly, there is that chat box on the bottom. So as we go on, we're going to ask that if you have a question that comes up, especially over a particular slide, if you could go ahead and pop your question and just type it into the chat box so that you don't forget it. Dave and Ellen will address all questions at the end. If it's something that you just have to have us stop, there's a little reaction box. And if you send me that open mouth, so see where that is up there? I'll know to ask somebody to take a pause, and then we can see what's happening, okay? And then, let's see, I just got my hand over there and took it away. So without further ado, I would like to turn the program over, just as like we did last week, over to Ellen Phillips. She is our small farms educator and here to talk to us about this next part of phase 2 of planning organic transition. Ellen, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Let me just bring up a short PowerPoint. Again, thank you so much, Debbie, as our host. We really appreciate your taking the time to make sure Zoom goes well for us. We do want to welcome everybody and just remind you one more time that it is being recorded. Debbie, as soon as they get it edited and up on the web, we'll send you that link. You can go back to that at any time as well, or if somebody else wants to watch it, just let Debbie know, and we'll make sure that happens. Today is the second session of the webinar series. We're going to be talking about how to transition your property or your land into organic production. Very similar format to last time. We have an amazing guest speaker who will be sharing some of his experiences for 45 minutes or so. And then you'll be able to ask any questions that you'd like to. We would, as Debbie said, please use the chat box for any questions, and we will try our best to make sure they are answered at the end of the webinar. If not, we'll make sure you get an answer some other way. Lastly, Dave has been very gracious and said that you can contact him anytime to ask questions or get some more insight into organics. So feel free to contact him. You've been given his contact information, either email or phone. Just wanted to introduce the topic again, and Dave is going to share a lot of his many years of experience in production. But I wanted to also just bring up some of the information regarding the fact that there's quite a bit of money out there, not huge amounts, but quite a bit of money to help you do this transitioning process. The most recent one is if you just look on the Biden administration's websites, there's a whole new transition memos, one of which it talks about soil carbon banks for farmers. And so that's carbon credits. And organic farming is a really good asset for that, to trap that carbon in the soil. And so it's a possibility of a way of getting some money and recognition of organics. There's also a lot of information from the USDA and support for various programs. There is an organic certification cost share that in the past has been, would cover up to 75% of the certification costs, or about $500. So that's about half the cost of certification, really helpful. And then keep in mind that our consumers are demanding organic products. And so we have a lot of companies like Michelob who can't get enough grain or other products. and are actually supporting farmers to transition organically so that in the future they will have enough whatever they need to produce their product for consumers. So there's many, many options. Don't let finances stop you from joining us in the organic production. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Dave Campbell. He is our speaker for the day. He is farmer owner of Lily Lake Organic Farm, which is in Maple Park. He grew up on his dad's organic dairy farm. So he's got lots of experience in that as well. I graduated from college, worked for his dad a bit, and then in 1988, purchased a farm close by and transitioned it from corn soybeans to 100% certified organic growing grain and hay, and has been doing that for since then. He has extensive knowledge about organic production and is very widely respected in the organic community. If you're into organics, you will have heard of Dave. And so we are incredibly grateful that he is willing to share that information with us tonight. He is often asked to give presentations or host field days, and that's where I've gotten these pictures from. He's been really good about teaching extension and other people about organic, not just farmers. He is a very busy farmer, but Dave really does believe in encouraging and supporting the greater organic community. And so he has quite the resume from being the founding board member, or chairman of the Midwest Organic Farmers Co-op. He's also been vice president of the Organic Crop Improvement Association. He has been board president of the Midwest Organic Services Association. He has served on the advisory council for USDA SHARE. If you're not familiar with SHARE, SHARE also has a lot of grants for farmers in their in production and research. Recently, and I don't know if you're still on the board, Dave, you can correct me. He's been on the board of directors for Moses, the counterpart of MOSA, which Kristen was certifying with. But Moses is the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, probably one of the most renowned organizations in supporting agriculture. So this man knows what he's talking about, and we are really, truly grateful, Dave, that you have joined us and willing to share that. Dave is thinking about retiring and will be consulting, so keep that in mind as well when you're transitioning. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Dave, if you want to share your presentation, we're looking forward to hearing everything you share.
Okay, thanks, Ellen, for the kind words, and Deb for your work here. I guess I'm waiting for the PowerPoint, right? To come up, and I need to click this. Thank you. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Not yet. Click on the bottom, share screen, the green button in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're going to go to your Zoom. Yeah. That looks, there you go. We're great.
It's like we practice. Perfect.
Yeah. So now just bring up, just open the PowerPoint like you would on a normal PowerPoint.
Okay, I've got the picture in front of me. The rest of you must not.
No, we're seeing the PowerPoint. So just all you have to do is click on that bottom right button.
There you go.
Yep, got it.
That's the one? Okay.
That's the
Yep.
one.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
We're ready. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Ready to go. Okay.
Technology, right? Okay. Alan had said quite a bit already. I won't add too much to it other than we farm about 10 miles west of St. Charles, just off Route 47 and 64 for those of you who get out this way on occasion. This farm was homesteaded by Mary's family in 1836, and we've been here since 1988. Prior to that, we had an organic dairy farm in Wisconsin, prior to that, just up the road from our current location, about 10 miles up in the Hampshire and Burlington area, where my father farmed dairy and other types of crops, even a couple acres of pickles back in the 60s when my dad started the process to organic production. We sold to Monarch Foods in West Chicago. Obviously, no organic markets, but we did sell organic meat rabbits to a health food store up in Mount Prospect, which is northwest of Chicago, to a health food store back before USDA got involved in certification.
Hey, Dave, before you begin, can you look more directly at your screen so the mic picks up your voice a bit better?
Okay, how is this? Is it picking it up better?
Not quite.
Okay.
Can you turn up your volume on your,
Okay, can you hear me better now?
I can. Can everyone else?
Yeah.
It's pretty
Okay.
loud here on my end. Does everyone hear me?
It's going in and out a bit. So, but
Huh, okay. Well, I'll try to talk louder. How's that?
that's perfect. Or maybe you need to be closer to the screen. Your mic might need you a little closer because that was perfect.
I'll try to get closer without sitting on the keyboard. How's that?
You're good. You're good. Just sit back and enjoy presenting. We will do our best listening. So
Yep, I can hear fine.
Okay, good. Okay, we're talking about the transitioning process. It's 3 years from the time the last prohibitive substance is applied to when you can sell organically. But that 3 years can be a little deceiving because it's technically 36 months. What I mean by that is 36 months from the last time a herbicide was used or a synthetic fertilizer or anything that is not certified organic. And so that's why you see the term 36 months, which is more accurate than 3 years. If non-organic seed is used during that period of time, you can use non-organic, assuming that it is untreated and is non-GMO seed. And again, you would need to check with your certifier to make sure that what you want to use is okay to use. Last week you had I did not see it, but you had the presentation on certification. So I'm not going to talk a lot about certification, but there are some points here that I think are important. So I will mention a couple of things here. The certification agency will hire an inspector, either part of their own agency or independent, to come out and do an inspection on your farm. Again, that's part of the enforcement, but also they're there to help you. If you have any questions, ask them, and they are there to help you along the way. Again, make sure that you have approval before you apply any inputs on your land. If you aren't sure, make sure you ask, because if you don't, you can lose a year of certification just because you put on something that was not certifiable. Okay, if you're in the process, you're going to need some help. We all do. I have my father, but there is Ellen had mentioned Moses. That's Moses Organic, Midwest Organic, Sustainable and Education Services. I had served on their board for 7 years, and I termed out last year. They do have a mentor program that is really, really helpful. There is some cost share money available that they receive for that program. It will cost a little money, but not very much. And so if whatever you're doing, they will try to line you up with someone, hopefully in your area, if not someone at least who is knowledgeable in your production, whether it be crops, livestock, vegetables, or whatever it may be. So that is a good program. You're paired with a mentor. You are the mentee, and there'll be usually a couple of visits throughout the year. You can even visit their operation, and obviously a number of emails and phone calls if needed. Another issue too is something called a prior land use affidavit. If you have a situation where, let's say, you've got some land, whether it's your own or someone else's, that has been maybe a hay field, for instance, let's say it's had no fertilizer, on it, no herbicides or anything prohibitive in a case like that. And that sometimes does happen, especially out by the suburbs, where there are some small parcels of land that someone just put it in the hay because it's small fields and so forth. And the big farmers with their 24-row planters really don't want to mess with something like that. So you will find those pieces of land around the suburbs quite a bit and beyond, out in the urban sprawl area. That could maybe be certified your very first year. But again, you'd have to get a prior land use affidavit signed by the owner of the land. Okay, one thing to be aware of is that you would need what they call a 30-foot border strip between your crop and your neighbor's crop. So here, this is on the southwest corner of our farm. We have a lane that comes off the road. My cornfield is on the right. The fence line there, right next to the corn, is my neighbor's cornfield. And so you have to keep 30-foot distance between the edge of your field and your neighbor's field, or just to be safe, I say my fence line, because usually the crop is within a couple of feet of the fence line. And so that needs to be put in place anytime it's someone else's land that had a herbicide or some kind of prohibited substance. If it's wasteland with no chemical spray or synthetic fertilizers, you'll probably be okay. And you saw in the previous picture, this is a little blow up of sign I put there. You need to have those signs located throughout your fence rows and that. This is in a place where it's close to the road, and I strategically placed these signs. I've got about 7 of them, so it's not very many. The signs last about a year or two, so they're not too expensive. And I put those in the fence line so that when my neighbor has someone come in to spray, whether it's him or a co-op or somebody, then that sign is there to remind them that this indeed is an organic farm. Be very careful. Do not spray or do not let the wind drift the herbicide over onto my land or your land or whoever's land is organic. So that is put there for that reason. Okay, this is a soil test. If you have farmland, it's always good to get a soil test. It's really important to know where you're coming from. And I'm not going to go into these numbers because of time. But I've got my pointer here, if you can see that. Just a couple things I want to point out here is calcium, magnesium. Those things I looked at really close, because if I get my calcium levels up, for instance, in this field number 7, in the upper 60s here, my goal is to get my calcium levels up in that 70–75% range. Magnesium, I want to get that lower. By doing that, by increasing your calcium levels, and your universities may or may not say this, they never said it years ago. Now they're beginning to think that, well, maybe there's something to this. But by having your calcium magnesium ratios in a decent balance, you'll find that the calcium will unlock trace minerals and other nutrients in your soils, which is good, because that means probably less fertilizer you would need to purchase. So again, lots of numbers there. I won't go into it anymore, but a soil test is really important to have done. I usually have it every 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years at this point, because I kind of know where my soils are at. But again, it's good to have a soil test done. Okay, so you're starting your rotation. Okay, how do you go about this and so forth? There's one thing you do not want to do is your first year of transition, do not, if possible, plant corn. Corn is a high input crop. You're probably going to have a lot of weeds. If you have small parcels of land, or if you have the finances, ideally, it's nice to plant a couple years of just multiple cover crops to build up the soil from where it's probably been. I'm assuming it's been a conventional corn soybean rotation on the farm. And so by doing that, it's a good way to really do it. Again, every situation is different. And so it's going to be costly to do that. And so you may not be able to. What we did here on this farm was we raised a lot of hay the first couple of years with oats, and then we sold the hay off the farm. If you do that, you just need to watch your fertility levels so you aren't taking a lot of nutrients like potash off the farm, unless you've got a lot of farms nowadays have high potassium levels, and so hay would be a good crop to raise in your transition if that was the case. Some farmers have grown soybeans the first year and have been successful. The reason being is that usually there's a little bit of herbicide residue left over after the previous corn crop. And in a case like that there, soybeans, you are getting some benefit. No guarantee that you will, but you may get some benefit from the herbicide. You want to plant beans later, just because we want the crop of beans, whatever crop, to compete well with the weeds. And so we will plant later our corn and beans later than the conventional farmers do, because we've got to get our soils to warm up to compete with the weeds. As I said before, avoid corn if at all possible in your transition years. Okay, we're talking about cover crops here. Cover crops are really beneficial for things like nitrogen, also for weed control. Intercropping is a process where we're growing more than one crop at the same time. A lot of farmers will raise red clover, frost seed it, or seed it after frost comes out early in the spring into winter wheat. Or you may want to put in some alfalfa grass hay with a crop of oats. Here's a situation here. This was taken out in at Kellogg Biological Station with Michigan State in Michigan. That is considered frost seeding. Ideal situation there where he's spreading some red clover seed. The ground is frozen. This is probably around the first week of March. We typically get some warm weather late February. And then, of course, we always get a cold blast typically in early March. And so the ground's dry enough, well, I should say frozen enough to drive on it. And with the light snow, he can see exactly where he's going. So he doesn't even need any kind of marker. This doesn't always happen, but it's a nice way to seed some clover on top of a winter wheat field. Okay, some of the benefits. When you have two crops, they can use resources more effectively than one crop. And so when you've got crops like winter wheat and clover together, they're going to be taking up the nutrients. They're at different stages of growth, and you're not really going to get many weeds coming into a crop like that. And here's an example here. This is on our farm. This is field bordered Route 64. Some of you may have been down been by this field if you're taking Route 64 from Sycamore to St. Charles. This is a crop of winter wheat that was planted the previous October. And this was, can you hear me okay? I'm getting a little notice here. Okay, it says that's unstable. Okay. And so this crop of clover, red clover, was planted actually pretty late, the first couple of days of May, almost too late because the wheat was about 5 inches tall, but it did work. And so there's a good example there of having two crops at the same time. And this is the same picture. It's just a close-up of the red clover, seeded at about 12 pounds per acre. That red clover will give me about 70 units of nitrogen for my next year's corn crop. It's pretty inexpensive when you look at the cost of fertilizer. And there again, it's for weed control, but also for fertilizer as well too for next year's corn crop. So let's say I'm going to do some cover crops after, let's say in August, after oats or wheat have been harvested. If I want to plant a cover crop such as oilseed radish or something that's smaller seed, that's a little more expensive, I'm going to want to do a more exact job of seeding that crop, and so I use my grain drill. I've got a 12-footer now. That's a 10-footer in the picture. I can cover about 4 acres an hour. It is kind of slow, but for a small farm, it's not that bad. And I can do a good job of my seeding rates and get good soil to seed contact because I'm using the drill to seed that seed. Otherwise, this is a 3-point spreader. This is attached to the back of almost any tractor. If I want to put on some rye after corn, or maybe a cover crop of oats in August after wheat, something like that, the seed is not as expensive, and I can make a lot more or quicker time by doing it that way. So that's just another option to seed. Okay, we're talking about, first thing I should explain is the letters NOP. What does that stand for? You may have learned last week. It is National Organic Program. That's what those letters mean. And they have a definition of a crop rotation, and that is, here's a practice of alternating annual crops on a specific field in a planned rotation sequence. So what this is saying here is that in organic production, unless it's a very unusual situation, you cannot raise the same crop 2 years in a row, like corn after corn, or soybeans after soybeans, or something like that. Even oats and wheat growing back to back, you can probably do, check with your certifier, but there again, they're both grass crops and very similar, so you probably would not want to do that. You want to mix up legume crop 1 year with a grass crop the next year in most situations. Okay, so the inspectors will come out to your farm. Before they come out, they're going to look at your paperwork. Nowadays, almost everything is done before the inspector comes out. They're reviewing your paperwork that you're going to turn in well before your inspection, so they can look it over. And so when they come out to your farm, they're not really wasting time and your money going over your paperwork at your farm. So they're going to look this over. They're going to look at your fertility inputs, make sure they're certifiable, what kind of crops, including cover crops, you have. Slope is not so much an issue here in Illinois. It could be, but usually not. What you're doing as far as your conservation practices, and again, what kind of crops you're growing. So this is something that is very common. We're talking about a farm where there's no livestock in this part of the country. It's pretty much, I don't want to call it a recipe, because I don't think we should be looking at recipes, because organics is a lot more than just a recipe of certain crops. So in this case here, typically what's grown is, let's say year one in your rotation, a small grain crop such as oats or wheat is the most common, with a red clover cover crop, followed by, and that would be a grass crop, followed by the oats and wheat is a grass crop. The red clover is a legume. So you've got a grass to a legume, followed by corn, which is a grass crop. Some people will plant a cover crop of rye, which seems to help somewhat with weed control in your next year's crop, which would be soybeans. And soybeans is a legume crop. So you've got your 3 crop rotation over 3 years. And then year 4 would be back to small grains again. So it doesn't have to be that way. It's just usually done that way. Here's a situation here on our farm where there was some oats. Picture there is right in front of you is oats that was harvested about a month, maybe 6 weeks earlier. That is a red clover cover crop. You see a lot of biomass there. It's looking really good. We had some rain. And to the left there, where the corn is at, the previous year they had a crop of alfalfa. So you can see where the clover or alfalfa provides much nitrogen. In addition to that, I'm also putting on some poultry manure, and I'll put that on, and also some starter fertilizer through my planter. And so I am putting on a lot of fertilizer for corn. Typically, I'll spend about anywhere from $250 to $300 before corn. My other crops are much less as far as fertility cost. But here again, I'm growing some of my nitrogen with clover and alfalfa. You can see the crops respond to the cover crop there with the nitrogen. Okay, a situation there where we have some milkweeds around the farm, and I like to leave them there on the borders of the field. Not too often you can get a butterfly in a picture. This time I did, and so that crop, I'm not sure any of you know what that might be. Some of you might. It is a crop of buckwheat. Buckwheat does a lot of good for soil health. That is a cover crop of buckwheat because that was planted heavier. You can also raise buckwheat for a cash crop. It doesn't pay near as well, but there are times when I do raise buckwheat, and that in a picture there would be a cover crop of buckwheat. Okay, this comes out of a book that a slide will be coming up soon to show just where this came out of, the name of the book, but a situation here where lots of cover crops, and the bad rap on cover crops here in Illinois, especially northern Illinois, is that, well, there's not many opportunities, but there really is in a 3-crop rotation where you're raising oats or wheat, and you've got a window of time after that harvest, which is typically August and September, where you can plant multiple types of cover crops. And so that's the beauty of a 3-crop rotation with a crop that's harvested in midsummer. There's lots of crops that can be planted in those windows of opportunity. This is a really good website. There's an organization. I remember Ellen and I were on this Midwest Cover Crops Council before I think Illinois ran out of money with extension, but it's called the Midwest Cover Crops Council. There's a website there. You can take that down, information. Lots of information, and they even have a chart that gives you the best cover crops to grow in your own particular county. Well, it's pretty much in the upper Midwest is where they're located, and it's just got all the information you want to know on cover crops. And here's the book I alluded to earlier with that chart. It's a Sarah publication. Again, it's a free download. It's a really, really good book by Sarah, Sustainable Ag Research Education. And that's a really good book. So that's got a lot of information there on cover crops. Okay, so now we're going out to the field. Once we plant the crop, there's basically 2 types of tools that I use for weed control. And this particular implement here, you can see that with my arrow, it's called a rotary hoe. You really need to get the weeds with this particular implement before you can see the weeds. And if you can see closely, there's a row of beans starting to emerge here, but generally speaking, about the 3rd, 4th, 5th day, let's say about the 4th day after planting, you'll want to be out in the field with this because this will get those really small weeds. And I've got my planter tracks there from the wheel marks so I can see where I'm going. And so this tool is used, it goes pretty quickly, and it does a good job on those weeds. A lot of people say, well, there's no reason to be out there, I can't see the weeds, but the weeds are there, and this tool will do a good job of getting the weeds. And there is a picture of taken right behind that rotary hoe. Again, it'll get those weeds that are really frail. That's called weeds are in the white root stage. When they're small, it'll pick them out fairly easily. When the weeds get bigger, then the rotary hoe is not going to do a whole lot of good. That's where we use the cultivator. Again, a close-up here of the rotary hoe. You see those points. Them are actually spoons I had welded onto my hoe wheels. They're pretty aggressive, and they will pick out those weeds if they're small enough. This is my cultivator. These are called disc killers, and this is a row of soybeans, of course. And I set those disc killers my first time through really, really close to the row to get as many weeds as I can, because the more weeds we can get with the rotary hoe or the cultivator, that means less expense out of my pocket to hire kids to come in and cut the weeds out. We do cut all the broadleaf weeds out of the row, and but this is the first time through with my cultivator. I've got a mirror that they came out with about 25 years ago. Some people have a hard time with it. To me, it's not been a problem. I mount it to my tractor frame. I can actually look into that mirror and see what's going on behind me. And so without having a fancy guidance system, which you can certainly use, this I can actually see what I'm doing. And now this is the second pass here of my cultivator. My bean field, sometimes I'll cultivate twice, sometimes 3 times. In the last 8 years now, we've had so much rain every spring that planting has been just a little bit later. And then we get warm weather typically when the rains stop, and so the crops go really quickly. And I'm able to cultivate only 2 times instead of 3 times, which saves a little bit of cost. And so that works out well. Here's a situation here back, I think it was maybe 2014, where typically I'll cultivate corn the first time when the corn's about maybe 4 inches tall, maybe 5 at most. That corn is about a foot tall, and you can see the weeds coming. Sometimes you just cannot get into the field, but by using good soil practices, good fertility, putting on the high calcium lime and so forth, what that does, it loosens my soil. I've got good soil flocculation there. And by having that good healthy soil, when I cultivate, I can cultivate and do a nice job of throwing dirt around the base of the corn plant, which really buries the weeds. And so even though I'm, about probably a week and a half later than what I want it to be in this field, with good soil health, I'm able to control the weeds. Here's another SARA publication. It's called Steel in the Field, and them are just different tillage tools that you can use to do tillage in your field. Okay, how am I doing on time? I don't have a clock in front of me.
7:07.
Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, another topic here is called off-farm seed dispersal. Be very, very cautious when you buy seed, that you buy seed that is weed-free. I did not do that once. I took a chance, and I had a few Canada thistle come into my farm. They're hard to get rid of too. So educate neighbors. This was the situation with the thistle. I did have a neighbor who was enjoying watching thistledown flying around his property. Little did he know that it was a big problem for his organic farming neighbor next door. Situation here where I'm out with something called a windrower, and that field was probably clean enough not to use the windrower, but I had a little bit of bindweed in part of the field. And so that is something we can do. We can cut that's the crop of oats. I can windrow it and then come back in. This is actually my backup combine. I hardly ever use it, but it's pretty handy when I need it. And I've got what they call a pickup attachment mounted to the front of the combine instead of a grain table. And that oats, it's on the ground for probably 3 or 4 days. If there's any weeds, the weeds will get dried out, so it'll thrash really nice. And so organic farmers use those. Even your conventional farmers out in places like Colorado that have barley contracts for Coors or something like that will cut their crop of barley or wheat or whatever they have early to get a little bit of a premium, to get a better quality crop. They'll get a little premium for their crop of wheat or barley. A weed cleaner, I bought that on a sale, and this is what I run my crops through. All my corn and soybeans go through this before I put the crop into my bin. Yes, it takes a little more time, but it does a really nice job of getting the weed seeds out. That's called a soybean hook, and that is used. I hire some local kids, always looking for work, and they'll carry one of those with them, and we'll walk through the fields to cut the broadleaf weeds out of my soybean fields. Here's a quote here by Jim out of Michigan. The importance of a healthy crop that's really important to have a healthy crop because that is a weed management tool. Here's a situation where I had some corn planted. It was really late. It was June 4th back in 2014. And I was getting a little nervous. But again, I don't want to plant a crop if the ground is too wet because that can cause a lot of problems. So I just wait and wait until the ground is dry enough. And I got a healthy crop, and that'll usually outcompete the weeds. Another situation here, this is June 30th, the same year, getting really late to plant beans, but the ground was wet. I decided to hold off and wait. And I had a variety of soybeans that I could plant later. It was a shorter day maturity. And so you need to match up your maturities with your planting dates when you expect your planting dates to be. And then just to kind of wrap this up here, this is a worksheet. It's always good to observe what's going on. This is just a chart here. The field number, say field number 5, any problem weeds, annual weeds, the weeds that come in every year, you can kill them. They may or may not come back the next year, but perennial weeds are your weeds like your Canada thistle or maybe quackgrass that will be persistent year after year if you don't get them controlled. And just some questions. You can make up your own questions, whatever works for you, but why are they causing an issue? What's worked, what has not worked, and possibly other observations. If you're looking for assistance to transition land to organic, an excellent resource here. Some of you may know about Liberty Prairie Foundation. Nathan Omberg is in charge of that. And they're located in Lake County up in Grays Lake, and it's not too far away. There's their website there. For those of you who maybe have land in north central Illinois, Rich Ritter with Flanagan State Bank out of Gridley, which is near Pontiac, has done a lot of work on organics as far as the financials are concerned. And then Compure Financial, they're out of Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. There is an office just west of me in Sycamore, but the real expert who's done a lot with organics, his name is Paul Dietman. He's out of the Sun Prairie office near Madison, Wisconsin, and that is his phone number there. So I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the chat box. I actually have a question. So I heard you say soil was the most important thing to make sure that you have good, healthy soil before you start the process. So is this having your soil prepared any different than when you're doing, say, more specialty products, more fruit and vegetables, or is it the kind of the same process in terms of making sure your soil's tested and anything you can share on that?
Sure. As far as soil testing, that would all be the same. Really the same process. The only difference would be if you're raising vegetable crops or some kind of specialty crop, it may involve maybe a little more tillage or something like that, but that would only be because of a different type of crop. As far as the process goes, you're still going to fertilize, you're still going to put in cover crops, and so it's probably more crop specific in that case.
Okay.
Hey, Dave, you mentioned using poultry manure. Can you just share a little bit about some of the amendments you've used?
Sure. Yeah, good question. As far as the manure goes, you can actually use manure from a farm that is not organic. Assuming that the chickens were not fed arsenic, which I don't think they are anymore. Sewage sludge you cannot use, but any kind of manure typically you can use. I use mined fertilizer products. For instance, sometimes I'll have products like potassium sulfate brought in from Utah, from Salt Lake. It's a little expensive with the trucking, but I do have that brought in at times. I use phosphate, soft rock phosphate, known as Tennessee brown rock phosphate, that comes in from, of course, Tennessee. High calcium lime, I usually get that down by Pontiac, Illinois. That's very inexpensive. That's typically about $7 or $8 a ton. Trucking for me might cost 20 some dollars, but it's pretty cheap compared to other types of fertilizers or amendments. Again, a lot of chicken manure. Most of mine usually comes in from southern Michigan, from Herbrucks. They're a large poultry operation. There's places in southern Wisconsin, chicken layer operation. So most of the fertilizer used is poultry manure, and that would be for a crop of corn. Gypsum is something we use quite a bit too, and that comes out of central Iowa. That's a really good product that contains good amounts of calcium and sulfur. So that would be pretty much the main fertilizers and amendments that I would use.
As far as manure goes, again, there's a lot of horse barns around, a lot of free horse manure. What would you advise for that?
Okay, with the horse manure, again, that would be okay. I think the thing you really need to watch out for is your carbon nitrogen ratio, because a lot of the horse farms would be using shavings, and so you would probably want to get that tested. Also, remember that they may be feeding hay that's got a lot of weed seeds in it, and so that is something that I would certainly have it tested before you apply it to your farm, because you could be looking at some issues.
Dave, what was the hardest part when you transitioned from traditional to organic farming? What would you say was the biggest hurdle for you back then?
Okay, the biggest hurdle for me, as well as pretty much everybody, I would say, is the issue with weeds. And that is usually the case when you transition the farm, like most of them are, that have been what we call monocropping, not just one crop, but we're calling corn and soybeans monocropping because they're both row crops, where you've had soils that have had where herbicides are used as a rescue treatment for weeds, and where maybe excessive amounts of potassium have been put on, maybe diammonium phosphate or muriate of potash and those types of things. So weeds would be the biggest issue, and that's what scares the most people the most is the weeds. And so that would be, especially the first couple of years, because it's not going to change overnight. Usually there's a rule of thumb. It usually takes anywhere from 5 to 6 years before you notice things starting to improve. And of course, it'll improve a little bit after a couple of years. So, and it might take 10 to 15 years. And not that you think after you've done a good job, you can just kind of relax a little bit. It doesn't work that way. You've got to be on top of it every year to keep up with the weeds and to make sure you don't have more land than what you have the equipment or time or management skills to handle.
Okay, thank you. Dave, we have a question from Brenda. Dave, well, it's to everyone too. Do you have an issue with aerial spraying from neighbors?
Okay, very good question. Have not had a problem with that, but whenever I see the planes out there, I'm watching very close to make sure that I do not have any drift. There is a website you can go on to. It's called Driftwatch, and Alan and Deb, you probably both know that. It's a place where I could actually list where my fields are. Your applicators are supposed to, I'm not sure all of them do, they probably don't, but they're supposed to look into that before they go out to spray to make sure that they know where organic land is located, because from the plane, they're probably not going to see your no spray sign. But we do have some legal recourse there if that does happen. But again, I watch that pretty close when I know they're going to be out spraying.
Great. We have another question. This is from Nancy. Planting 12 foot middles between Aronia berry rows. Any suggestions for cover crops? So Aronia berries.
Aronia berries. Okay, there's been a number of Sarah grants on Aronia berries. I'm not aware of any growing around here. I know there's been people out in Iowa that have grown them. you're looking for what, a cover crop between the rows of berries, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and what was the distance again?
They're 12-foot middles,
Okay, 12-foot middles. Okay, boy,
just to
I-
cut down on the mowing, you know.
you know, I'll defer on that one because I don't know enough about Aronia berries other than I think maybe sometime I might want to try them. I thought about it, but I would not want to answer that for fear that I may not give you a good answer. But there is, I could certainly look into it, and if you want to get back to me. In fact,
Okay.
actually, they're doing research now in the last couple of years, believe it or not, instead of going down to 30-inch spacing on corn, they're doing some research going back to 60-inch rows with cover crops in between. So you just think you've got it figured out where you're never going to change things, but research always comes up with something different, it seems like.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you.
Nancy, there's also a website through Cornell University, Cover Crops, that is a very vigorous, interactive website where you can enter what your season is and where you're at and what you're growing, and they will give you suggestions of what cover crops might work. So
Yes, in fact, that's good, Alan. There's a book too that was put out, maybe Chuck Mulder or someone from Cornell, I think, put out a book. I can picture it. I know you can get that book almost anywhere. And that is an excellent book. And I would think that would probably cover that. At least almost any vegetable would be in that book. But I forget the name of it, but it is out there and one of us can look into that for you.
as well as the website that Dave mentioned, Midwest Cover Crops. I mean, that they've tried very hard to be the main source of cover crop information for the Midwest.
Right.
And have a lot of information on that website, so definitely check that out.
Great. Thank you.
And I believe I found it, so I'm going to forward this to everybody in the chat box. Okay. We have another question. This is from Brenda. Do you know which cover crops are beneficial for bees, honeybees in particular?
Okay, well, the greatest crop for that would be buckwheat. Buckwheat is just fantastic for honeybees and other native pollinators as well too. So buckwheat is by far number one, but there are other cover crops too that would probably draw in some beneficials, but buckwheat would be the best.
Dave, can you share a little bit about your experiences with diseases that come in, especially like wheat and so forth, that are a little more perilous when it comes to that?
Okay, you mentioned, was that weeds you mentioned?
Any of the crops, but
Diseases, I would say sometimes we'll have some insects, but usually not too bad. Over the last 33 years on this farm, I think I had someone spray maybe 3 different times for insects. There are actually approved organic herbicides that can be used. And so, but usually they're not bad enough to warrant the cost to spray. But in your first few years that you're transitioning, plus maybe 2 years beyond, you might have more of a insect problem, but there are things that can be sprayed. As far as weeds go, I think my biggest weed is a perennial Canada thistle, and I've been involved in actually a research project that came out of Illinois with Dr. John Masunis back about probably 2008, 2009, that I've had used that at times, the protocol for that project, using sorghum Sudan grass as a fast-growing cover crop that with a photosynthesis that blocks out the sunlight, and that has helped quite a bit on the Canada thistle issue. As far as other weeds go, again, it's fertility, it's doing lots of little things, timing of your hoeing and cultivating, a number of little things that will just usually get better over time.
I just wanted to say that Sherry Ann shared that her bees have loved hairy vetch.
Yes.
What is-
Okay, hairy vetch is very good. It's about the best crop you can put in for nitrogen credits. It's an excellent crop. A lot of farmers use hairy vetch, but not so much organic farmers. Organic farmers did back, maybe 10 to 20 years ago. But the problem with hairy vetch is that when you go to raise oats or wheat or any kind of small grain crop, and if you want to sell it into the food grade market, your semi-load of grain will probably be rejected because that hairy vetch seed will be viable seed usually a couple weeks before you harvest your small grain crop, unfortunately. If it was a little bit later, you'd be okay. But when you're selling a semi-load of wheat and you see a little black BB from the hairy vetch in your load of wheat, it might get rejected. So organic farmers in the last 10 to 15 years have not raised hairy vetch too much, but it is an excellent, excellent cover crop.
Yeah.
But just not, maybe for feed grade, you can raise it, but I would probably not, just because you can't volunteer on your farm.
Also, there's a very extensive root system, so it's a little more difficult to kill off as a cover crop. So, can you speak a little bit, Dave, to how you treat or take care of the grain and in storage and preparation for market?
Yes, excellent point. With the grain, I make sure the grain is going to be stored almost always for a long period of time, meaning probably at least 6 months, maybe up to a year. There just is not that much storage available at your elevators for organic crops, and so you're probably going to store the grain, which is not so bad because you're going to get a premium. Typically, the longer you store the grain, typically your price will be better. But with your storage bins, you need to make sure they're in good condition. Typically, with most crops, you want to make sure that you've got an aeration floor so you can get air through your floor up into the grain. And there's a product called diatomaceous earth. It's a powder that I'll usually use for crops that are harvested in the summertime, like oats or wheat. I'll mix a little bit of that in to kill off the bugs. What happens is the insects will eat that and it'll dehydrate them. It might take a week or so, but it'll just kill them off. And that works quite well. So just your grain bins need to be in good shape with good aeration, and you probably are going to have some storage on your farm.
All right, here's another one. Do you have any advice about how I locate markets for selling organic produce?
Okay, organic produce. Ellen, you probably answered that one better than I could because we don't have produce here.
It is part of the focus for next week, and so we will address some options for that. So,
I guess we have to wait till next week to find out. It's a cliffhanger.
Easier for next week. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, I, for one, loved your presentation and want to thank you so much, Dave, for your time and your expertise. It was great. Particularly loved all of the photos that explained what you were doing. That was wonderful. And I want to thank Ellen, as always, for putting this together, and for everyone who's attended. Anyone have any other final thoughts? Okay. Then, as like we said the previous week, we will go ahead and send you the information tomorrow, along with a feedback, and anything that you could provide to us would be great that we could then share with Dave and Ellen. Okay. And as well as a copy of the recording. All right. And it looks like we have, thank you, Dave. Thank you
very much, Dave.
Yes, lots of great comments. Thank you for an excellent informational presentation.
And
Okay.
thank you for putting this on.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Everyone have a great evening and thank you so much for being here and we will see you next week for the final installment. All right. Have a great night.